So if you've been living under a bit of a rock the last 24 hours, you may not realize that Overwatch 2 actually has a perk system now. And while today we're not going to be talking about how that perk system is actually implemented, I really just wanted a bit of an unfiltered, not rant, but discussion on like, does Overwatch 2 even need perks? And really the upsides and downsides of this perk system, and going more in detail on exactly how I hope it gets done moving forward. I think that there's just so many important details that have to be discussed here. And I think the most important thing, if you want my opinion right now, is going to be its implementation. How exactly is this perk system not implemented right now, but how is it going to be continue to be implemented and adjusted moving forward? Because to me, that's going to be the quality of how the perk system is actually received, is how it's actually done moving forward. The first step, it's done, it's fine, it's fun, it's fresh, it's new. I had a good time yesterday on stream. And I don't think that there's anything fundamentally wrong with having a perk system. I've been seeing a lot of takes about it's fundamentally competitively flawed, which is kind of total nonsense. Imagine if we just took away one cooldown from every single character in the Overwatch cast, right? And then said that, oh, that's a much more competitive integrity game because there's fewer things to adjust and choose. It's more about, do those things actually take skill to use and choose? You see, power creep in of itself, well, I'm getting off topic. See, I knew this was going to be a rant, okay? And I know there's going to be people that disagree with me, but I've thought this through. I'm going to give you my opinion on this. It's not fact, but this is something that I put a lot of thought into. I'm going to be heavily referencing for the first little section here for context, my interview with Alec Dawson. This is on my Spilo, etc. channel, which used to be my VODs channel. I'm streaming on YouTube now. Oh yeah, I'm streaming on YouTube now. So I don't really need this anymore. It's kind of empty, but if you guys do want to go watch this interview, that's where you go. And it's not monetized, by the way, so it's free. You can actually, basically, a lot of my stuff is going to be referencing this discussion with Alec. I kind of just use this as background. It's about a 20-minute interview, I think. And basically, what a perk is supposed to do is kind of the main question here. And I'm going to be kind of paraphrasing what Alec discusses with me. He says, shoring up weaknesses, having a character have a little bit more viability and more situations, kind of maintaining the strengths and the weaknesses of the character and not destroying its identity, but giving it a little bit more flexibility. And a good example of this that we kind of utilized pretty quickly was Sigma, where he has no verticality at all. So he's really, really bad at maps like Gibraltar. Basically, just you can't play him on Gibraltar up until third point. And while that's fine and all, that's definitely the Overwatch classic approach. Giving him a little bit of verticality, if you lean into that major perk, helps to shore up that weakness a little bit, but he's still not a dive tank. He's still going to be weak in those situations. And the same thing goes with his other major perk, which is his float. Essentially, where if you hit 5 directs, you charge up your fist, which the enemy can see. And then if you melee the enemy tank or whatever, they actually float away from you. So it allows you to buy, if you're able to do it, if you're able to land it, a little bit of skillful counterplay versus tanks that would generally just run you over. Again, a situation or a weakness of Sigma that he's still going to be bad in those situations, but at least he has a little bit of skillful counterplay. And I think that's the big thing for me is it skillful? Does it still maintain the original weaknesses and strengths of the original character? In other words, we don't want a full brawl tank Sigma. We don't want a full mobility tank Sigma, but we can give him at least a little bit of leeway. Also, what's a cool fantasy was something that Alec had brought up is, in other words, what is something that feels like the character should do or could do? Another example that we brought up was kind of like the Baptiste turrets, where he has those things that he's just never reutilized at any point in his kit. Now he actually uses them as part of a minor perk. We want to lean into playstyles that people want to try. So the Sombra heal, there's a lot of Sombra players out there that are interested in having more of a Sombra utility support. Well, you can do that now. It's important to have a learning curve with the perks. Now, again, keep in mind here, we're not saying that whether all the perks have this right now. There's 168 of them. This is their first iteration. So we'll critique more of these later on. We want majors specifically to be the ones cutting to the gameplay loop, right? Where minors maybe change your gameplay loop, but the majors ones should have an effect on your gameplay loop. And if they don't, it becomes a problem. We'll talk why later. The goal was to get value. You need to put effort in with as many perks as possible, not passive free value, right? We need to be looking at sustain in particular. You want to have more tools to shift around for balance-wise. And frankly, you just want tools that are interesting. How interesting is this perk to use? Is it boring? Is it fun? Fun is always better, and that kind of goes without saying here. We just don't want competitive things. We could also want competitive and fun things. They've kind of adjusted how much complexity a player is able to handle. And this is obviously a system that's been at work for quite a long time. I know that they've been developing for this a long time. I mean, I actually play tested a very early iteration of this back in November before Rivals was even released. And it was very similar to what it is today. But obviously Rivals kind of showcases, even though the system was already in play, I'm sure it gave them a lot more confidence that, yeah, this is the way to go, because Rivals has a lot of kits like this, right? There's strengths and weaknesses, but there's a lot of, I mean, hate to say it, but there's a lot of kit bloat. I mean, kind of similar to what we're having today, where before, there's a lot of choices. I mean, I found myself feeling Rivals-esque with like the number of buttons that I had to press with certain characters, right? But obviously Rivals is a great casual game and it's a lot of fun. So, without compromising what makes Overwatch, maybe it's more doable nowadays. Maybe the player base as a whole has become more accustomed to that, whereas back in the day, that wasn't as much of a thing. Crucially, it still needs to feel like the hero that you're playing, not just doing more damage for free. I think Rivals has also done this pretty well, sometimes not so well with group ups, depending on the situation. And then also, they're willing to refresh the individual perks as time moves forward if they're not balanced or if they're not interesting, and maybe even evaluating the system itself. And so you can he goes into a lot more detail there, but that's kind of the quick TLDR. And I really think it's important to frame that within that so that I'm not just kind of like telling you what I think, but what their goal, what their actual plan is. And so I want to kind of delve a little bit more deeper into each of these things. So let's start with competitive integrity here. And I think this is the big one because obviously a lot of people are like, is this system competitive integrity? Is it complete nonsense and complete silliness? And there's a lot of people that are like, oh, let's balance for fun. Let's not balance for balance sake. And it's what ruined Overwatch. And I'm going to kind of do a quick graze over each of these things because it's really hard to go in detail in a quick video, but I'm going to try and do the best that I can. Big thing here is competitive integrity, like fun is definitely a priority here. Like there are a lot of perks that aren't balanced, but I don't think that that's something that they want to stay that way forever. It's just their first iteration. They needed to get it out. They wanted to start play testing, and obviously having millions of play testers is going to be a lot better than internal testing in terms of actual quality. So they gave it the best iteration that they possibly could, but then they'll need to adjust things as moving forward. Because let's be honest, this is a big system. This isn't just, a new hero or a new balance patch where you'd think they do a better job getting it out. This is 168 perks across the entire cast. So they're going to get some things wrong here. So I think going out with like, okay, is this somewhat fun at least, even if it's imbalanced? That I think was the guideline here. And I think they did an okay job here. Like there's definitely some game-breaking perks, but for the most part, it's not an unpleasant experience. And it is definitely very thoughtful and very fun, which I think is the most important thing. So the question again is going to be like, what's the second iteration? And moving on from that, how much of this is going to be classified as power creep? And by power creep, we mean we have characters that are designed for a specific purpose and a specific power level that now scale to just unbelievable levels. And power creep is not as much of a problem if the systems scale with it. Let me give you guys an example. Let's say you have, an interesting example is actually Season 9. Okay, so Season 9. Maybe a good example of not great power creep in a weird way that you might have thought about. When you increase everyone's health pools and make shots easier to hit, the bad side of power creep is always what gets left behind. What system did we forget about? Now, there were a lot of cooldowns, a lot of things that they forgot about in Season 9. This is not a review of Season 9. I've made a video of that recently. But it was interesting is that health packs became less useful because when everyone's health is larger, a health pack is a smaller subsection of your health pool, right? It's not as large of a percentage. Now, is that okay? Is that game breaking? It's probably not game breaking. But what about ammo? Like you see, everybody has infinite ammo, yes, but you're forced to reload a lot more post Season 9. And again, that's not a system that you think about all that much, but it kind of got left behind, and it definitely makes things a little bit more awkward for certain characters that have fewer shots. And so that's kind of where power creep can be really dangerous here. So everyone gets perks, so it's technically not power creep, but maybe not all those perks are at the same power level, and maybe that's going to throw win rates and balance rates out of flux, and maybe there's something that was getting left behind. Maybe a perk makes a cooldown or a play style or a matchup kind of irrelevant or obsolete. And that's where they need very, very close attention. You see, I think one of the funny things is a lot of people that complain about power creep are also the people that complain a lot about Season 9, which slow down the time to kill, whereas this may increase the time to kill or decrease the time to kill, speed things up because there's going to be a lot more damage capability. Now, you could also argue there's a lot more sustain capability. So again, my point being is that this is not an easy topic to discuss and kind of has to look on a case-by-case basis. So as long as they're sensitive to these things, I'm okay with it. It didn't feel like Junkenstein's Lab where I'm constantly getting one-shot. It didn't feel like everyone had 5,000 HP. There was certainly some sustained cooldowns which were broken. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But from a power creep perspective, it still felt like Overwatch. This isn't Junkenstein's Lab. I think for the real power creep experience, we're going to be seeing Stadium, which I think is going to be overall a much more casual game. Balance versus fun. A lot of people talking about balance versus fun. Should we just be not care about balance, not just play for fun? I think when we talk about what is fun, it's like exciting things, it's maybe broken things, it's hero fantasy things. But I actually think balance versus fun is a really important conversation to have, and we'll give a quick crash course on it because I don't agree with either side. I don't think that you should necessarily only balance for balance's sake and everything has to be perfectly balanced. And I think that's been Overwatch's mentality in the past, and I think it's been bad. I think 2024 saw a shift in that mindset, which I think was for the better, which was, okay, you guys ready for a hot take? I think 2024 was Overwatch's best year for balance and yet their worst year for balance. I think that you had more characters that were really actively bad, Moira, Mercy, Orisa, Roadhog, Bastion, and that was the best possible thing for the game. You had more characters that were actually gutter tier. I don't know if that's actually technically true, but there were a lot of characters that were gutter tier that needed to be gutter tier for everyone's enjoyment. You see, the problem is that balance is only fair when everybody has the same amount of effort to get the same amount of reward. It's not fair for Orisa to have the same win rate as Winston. I'm sorry, that's just not the case. Orisa takes a lot less effort to perform the same task, especially when you factor in the fact that Orisa has a lower skill floor, so it's easier to pick her up. So a lower ranked Winston will get destroyed by an Orisa, which discourages people from playing Winston. And we can go on and on about that. I'm not going to do that. But that's the key thing here. Did the amount of risk or effort that you put in give you the same amount of reward? And I think in 2024, that was honestly better. It's been a huge problem for Overwatch in the past, but objectively, if you look at the characters that were performing and the characters that weren't, generally the higher skill characters throughout 2024 did better. And that goes for the entire year. And that's a good thing to hear. And I don't want that to change here. You see, with the perks here, there's a chance that we're going to have some of these crappy characters that just dominate metas start to sneak their way back up again. And that's where I think we need to factor in balance for fun. Is it fun to play versus Orisa? Is it fun to play versus Winston? Which one is better? Which one is better for the fun for low rank players, mid rank players, and high rank players? And I don't think that that's clearly objective, but I do think there are some objective truths that are in there. And I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of effort required and the amount of counterplay available to the person playing versus that character. We're not going to go any further than that. Last thing I will say is to kind of counteract the other side, which is, oh, we shouldn't worry about balance at all. I think that's a really silly thing to say. As somebody who's played board games, video games, a lot of competitive stuff extensively, even sports, novelty is great, but it gets old. And what keeps people playing a game is the competitive integrity, or I could have done that differently, I could have tried that differently. And if you throw balance out the window, you don't have a competitive first-person shooter anymore. And there's a reason why people try that. The people that say that Overwatch balanced the fun out of the game don't really understand exactly what they're saying. If you're saying specifically that they try to make all heroes have the same win rates, and that was a bad decision because some characters required more effort, and basically what I just said, then I agree with you. But if you say that, oh, they tried too hard to make the game fair, I think that's silly, because making the game fair is what makes people want to log back in and play and try again and learn again over and over and over again. And I think that's where I don't agree. And I think Perks has the capability of kind of towing that line. Okay, risk versus reward. We kind of already talked about this, but are perks requiring you to take risk and get reward out? Some of them are. We'll talk more about that in a second. I don't think this was really developed for Rivals, like to answer Rivals. Obviously, this has been in development a lot longer than Rivals has been out. But I hope the intention here isn't just to kind of chase fun, silly experiences only at the expense of the game, because I think Overwatch has classified itself as the best competitive first-person shooter, and it needs to stay there. Like I said, it really comes down to execution more than anything else. Let's get into some individual examples here. So the first couple topics we're going to talk about is counterpicking. I think the idea here is that, in theory, as I said with the Signal perk, we'll show that on the screen right here. I don't know if my camera's in the way here. My camera might be in the way. Let me actually pull this up here. Yeah, so my camera's in the way, so I'm just going to move my camera really fast. But the idea is that, in theory, counterpicking could become a little bit worse if you just... I'll drop myself down here. Counterpicking can be a little bit worse if you actually have more choices of outplaying stuff. So, for example, if I go for Hyper Strike here, my quick melee levitates the tank. So if I'm not getting run over by Reinhardt every single time, if I can outplay him, that's great, good stuff. But that's not always the case, okay? If we look at Brigitte, what is Brigitte really strong versus? She's really strong versus Dive, Divas, Winston's, Tracers, and so on. Well, if you look at Brig's perks, especially stuff like Morale Boost, especially stuff like Quick Fix, right? We're just talking about like burst pack healing, but even better and even more Inspire. Like, she's just better versus Dive. Like, it's just, she's the same character, but she has even more exacerbated strengths, and she actually has the same weaknesses. If I play a lot of Brig, I coach a lot of Brig, and one of the things that Brigitte really struggles with is these really poke-heavy compositions. She can't close the distance on them at all. So I was thinking, like, what if they gave her a speed boost after her shield bash on her only, so she could kind of take angles, and there's a lot of other things that they could do, or maybe even lean more into the whiplash kind of a thing. But the problem is that you basically just pick the sustain cooldowns, and any composition before perks that felt bad, well, they still feel bad. In fact, they might even feel worse, because while they've shored up her strengths versus dive even more, because she's not been given anything to shore up her weaknesses, and maybe characters like Pharah or Hanzo, Bastion, Torbjorn are even stronger, then she's going to actually feel worse. So in many ways, there are a lot of these perks that have actually improved the counterpicking situation, and some of them have made them worse. And I think that's a really careful thing that we have to watch out for, is that are these perks free value because it's not going to feel good playing Brig into these comps, and it's not going to feel good playing Dive into Brig. So we actually have a situation where counterpicking for a lot of characters, when the perks are not done well, could actually be done worse. There's a lot more examples about that. I think even one of the... Okay, you guys ready for a hot take? This perk here with the bubble, this major perk, Revitalizing Barrier, this heals yourself. This heals you. You actually can get up to 240 healing. You almost never get that. But you can get up to 240 healing on yourself when you're barriering, right? Talk about what's Winston strong at. Diving. And now you can self-heal on the dive. So I don't think this one's as bad, because there are a lot of ways you could use it. I think it's intended more for your allies, maybe helping a dive, like a tracer, or peeling your backline, or even maybe, I guess, in a tank trade, right? But again, like, there's a clear example here of where I don't think this is a bad perk, but we have to be really careful that Winston, who's already really good at diving, didn't just get significantly better. Whereas something like a Chain Lightning, that one actually definitely changes some of the choices that you make in different ways. I think that we got to be really careful about situational choice rather than always better. You look at characters like Pharah, right? Pharah's got a major perk here. Where the frick is Pharah? Pharah's got a major perk here with Concussive Implosion. Concussive Blast knockback is inverted to a pull in. So I'm not going to demonstrate all these, but basically the idea is that, like, instead of using a Concussive Blast to knock people away, it actually pulls people in, and it can also pull you in. Now, the problem with that is that most of the time when you're playing Pharah, you're hugging cover. So if you use Concussive Implosion to move yourself, well, it's hard. There's nowhere really near me, right? And actually, it's much better to use Concussive Blast to knock me away from cover, right? So for movement, Concussive Implosion seems to be a little bit worse, but it is much better if you're standing still and shooting rockets at the enemy. So Implosion is going to be probably a lot better in more static maps or static comps. But if you're looking to rotate, move, actually just utilizing fuel stores, the other major perk, is probably going to be a lot better. And that's really important here. There's not necessarily a clear choice all the time, at least obviously right now. I think Bastion has a similar thing as well, where if you look at Bastion's minor perks here, you look at his Tactical Grenade Bomb, that's pretty darn useful. You can move around a lot more, and it doesn't do self-damage. But Armored Artillery is really good. It definitely levels up the ultimate in the situations which you can use the ultimate. So there's not a very clear choice with the minor perks. But if you go to a character like Tracer, if you look at her major perks, Recall restores all blink charges versus overhealth. I'm sorry, guys, but 3 blinks is way better than 50 overhealth. Maybe it's something that you might have to put a little bit of thought and experience into, but I'm telling you guys, 3 blink is way more than 50 health in terms of actually survivability and offensive capability. The things that you can do with this character is insane with essentially 7 blinks, because you start to regenerate. I mean, actually, it could be even 8 blinks. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And I think this is just always going to be better. And I think that that's kind of not what you want with perks. Now, I don't mind. I think Alec talks about this, having a perk that's clearly better, but one is really fun. I don't think this is the case, but for example, like you can turret on walls, but then you could also have level 3 turret. I'm not sure which one would become a must pick here. I'd have to think more about it. But maybe there's one that's a must pick for Torbjorn. But the other one still could be really fun. And I think that's okay. But for the ones that are a must pick and the other one's just not a must pick because it's not that fun, I think we have a bit of a problem. Scale of Power. So this one kind of goes without saying. Reinhardt is a major perk that gives HP when you hit a charge. It's good. It's a major perk. It's not terrible. It's not the most OP thing ever, but it's all right. It's decent, right? But then you compare that versus on a nano boost, where she could freaking nano herself for the full duration and full potency while nanoing somebody else. I mean, guys, like this is not good. Like, it's incredibly broken. It completely changes everything. Whereas Reinhardt gets a nice little perk, Ana just gets another ultimate, right? She gets double ultimate, right? And that's not even factoring in the crit one, which is also very strong. And I think there's just a clear scale of power here that's going to need to be taken a careful look at. Obviously, there may be characters that have weaker major powers, that have stronger minor, and vice versa, and that might kind of shift things around here. But I am a little bit concerned here that we're going to have a couple of characters that just clearly have significantly better perks than the entire cast, and that's going to completely shift pick rates and win rates. I mean, I'm seeing basically Ana every game in my games, and I don't think that's a surprise given her immediate strength from those. And I think we're going to have to keep an eye on this. I think major perks being stronger is fine, but obviously there are going to be, not all perks are created alike right now, and I think this is where you're going to start to see the power creep, where some characters are clearly superior to other characters when it comes to their perks. Any player experience. Let's give an example of that. So the Winston alt fire one with major perks basically allows secondary fire to chain to nearby targets for 60 damage, which is pretty darn good, and it's situational, but it's decent, right? And if you're getting chain lightning, that's kind of your fault, right? You shouldn't be standing directly next to the target that's getting chain lightning. Take an angle, split out, and it still requires skill play for the Winston to hit it, and worst case scenario, it's only 60 damage. You compare that versus Maze Slow, which we'll pull up Maze. I really dislike Maze. Maybe at some point I'll share with you guys some of the perks that I've brainstormed. But anyway, which is Biting Cold, which secondary fire slows enemies by 15% for 1.5 seconds, stacking up to 30%. Guys, if you're playing tank without a way to mitigate this alt fire slow, you're going to be permanently slowed for 30 seconds, or for 30%, like basically permanently. And in addition to that, if you get hit by alt fire from range, it's more likely she's going to be able to hit the next alt fire. This perk sucks. I played Wrecking Ball into May with this. It was obnoxious. I would get slowed on my rollout and then get slowed even worse on her primary fire when she got up close. So obviously perks are meant to be strong, but not all perks feel the same in terms of I like playing versus that, right? Some of these are like, okay, well, it's a skill play, skill check, it is what it is. But this one just felt horrible for a lot of people. And I think that is something that you should probably factor in a little bit. Final factor here we're going to talk about, which is like the level of fun, hero fantasy, interest of the person playing them. A good example is the Junk Riptire one. We'll pull this one up really fast, which allows you to speed boost the Riptire. Now, some of you might be like, oh, it feels terrible to play into. Maybe, but it's really fun as a Junkrat player to be able to speed boost your tire. There's even risk reward because you lose your damage. Not only does that cost your perk choice, but also you lose a lot of your Riptire damage if you choose that. You can't kill a tank with that. But it feels amazing. It's super fun. The BAP turrets, Alec Dawson talks about this, but being able to pop your ultimate and have little turrets blast out, it sounds cool. It looks cool. Zarya alt fire, you go even further in the air when you're bouncing your alt fire off the floor. It's really, really fun. The Torb turn on the walls. All these things are like, okay, I don't know how balanced all of them are, but for right now, they're just so much fun, right? It's so much fun. But then there's Life Weaver, who, if we look at one of his minor perks, and it's a minor perk, but so are the other ones, he just has a permanent 10 healing per second. And yes, he drops a healing seed, but really you're picking this one for the 10 healing per second. That's permanently up, whether you're being damaged or not. And that's just not all that. And I mean, even within Life Weaver, you look at Life Weaving and Super Bloom. I think Life Weaving is actually a little too weak there. I'll let you guys read it. But those two majors are actually kind of more interesting. But Life Cycle is just, you just have a permanent HOT. And there's a lot of ones, especially in the support cast, that are just kind of like, you do more of this. And it's not that fun for the person playing into the character. And it's not that fun, most importantly, for the person playing the character. I think a good example of this is like the DPS Doomfist in Overwatch Classic. And I playing that again, I was like, man, I see why they removed this character, because he's unbelievably high risk, high reward. But you know what? At least it was fun for the Doomfist. At least somebody was having fun doing what they were doing. And I don't want to classify somebody's fun as according to my standards, but I do think it's pretty going to be, if you were to poll people, I think a lot more people would have fun with some of the perks that I listed earlier and probably wouldn't care as much about some of the perks that just kind of feel like free value. And these are the things that I think need to be changed. Even if they're not that offensive, it's more of a question of what perk could we use instead of this one. I've had a lot of ideas with Life Weaver, whether it's slingshotting, with Life Grip, whether having reduced cooldowns with Life Grip, and so on. But I think this is one of the perks that was kind of a miss for me. And I think biggest thing for me is really everything comes down to execution moving forward. I don't think we're going to see we may see a hot fix, but I don't think we're going to see really a balance patch for these perks for at least a few weeks. So we'll give them some time to cook. But the first balance patch in terms of what perks come in, what perks come out, what things get changed, what things get balanced is going to be really interesting to me. And I hope they set the tempo for how things move forward with these perks. I'm cautiously optimistic, and from a competitive learning experience, it is really nice to not know for once, right? I mean, I've studied this game for 12, 13, 14,000 hours. It's been my full-time job, whether coaching it or whatever else, for 6 years, over 6 years, and actually 7 years. Wow. And I think it's kind of nice to not know the answer to all of these. Like, I don't know what the best perk is for Hanzo all the time. I don't know what the best perk is for Venture. And I'm still experimenting and learning. And that's a really kind of satisfying experience for me. And that's not even considering from the casual standpoint where it's just fun to just try new things. And I kind of had that experience yesterday, trying new things. And so from that perspective, it's great. From a competitive integrity standpoint, it also has the potential to be great, but it comes down to the execution and some of the concerns I listed earlier. So that being said, we'll cut them some slack. If you guys are interested in seeing more of my thoughts on the perks, I did have a video a few days ago where I kind of grade the perks. Now, I think some of my ratings have changed since then, but for the most part, it's pretty accurate with how I feel right now. And then additionally here, I think we're going to be doing a brief guide on how to pick each perk. That should be later this week or early next week. We've done tank and support already, and we're working through the DPS guys. Just going to give you an idea of what perks you should be picking and when. Anyway, enjoy the video. See you in the next one.